Welcome back to Reading the Sky. We are looking at the month of August. We've got a busy forecast this month. 2 eclipses, an eclipse portal, some tense T-squares, a couple beautiful trines, and several planets changing signs. So let's take a look at the astrological forecast for August. So before we get anywhere near eclipse season, August begins with the first harvest. Lulusa celebrate around August 1st and marks the first harvest of the agricultural year. It's a time to recognize what has come to fruition while acknowledging that the agricultural season is not quite over. Into themes of harvest, growth, gratitude, and perseverance associated with Lulusa. And enjoy that moment of grounded reflection because August 2nd brings our first points of tension. We have Moon in Pisces squaring Mars in Gemini. Moon in Pisces is also going to oppose Venus in Virgo, creating that T-square. This creates tension. We have that emotional sensitivity, intuition, permeability from the Pisces moon. We have discernment, standards, practical expression of care and value from the Virgo Venus. And Gemini Mars becomes that point and Mars in Gemini creates that pressure point. Mental activity, words, competing impulses, nervous energy. The mutable signs dominate in this aspect, making things feel changeable, scattered, difficult to plan for. The best way to ride out this T-square is to know you don't have to solve every feeling the moment you feel it. And the very next day we have Chiron going retrograde, beginning a months-long journey turning inward towards healing. In astrology, Chiron is known as the wounded healer. This archetype represents our deepest emotional wounds, the places we feel vulnerable, and ultimately the wisdom we gain from healing. During its retrograde, that healing journey turns internal, encouraging reflection rather than action. And after that, August 4th, we have our last quarter moon in Taurus. The moon gives us another quarter phase check-in and another tense configuration.
Set. I just got this little set comfortable. No, put that back. Jupiter, stop expanding things. Pluto, put down the sledgehammer.
With the moon in Taurus, caught between Leo's push towards growth and visibility and Aquarius's Pluto's demand for deeper change, staying comfortable may not be the same thing as staying secure.
But this isn't necessarily a quiet Taurus moon. Sometimes the most powerful transformation comes to choosing peace over resistance. And ask yourself what no longer supports the life I'm trying to build. With the moon in grounded Taurus, the focus shifts to stability, self-worth, finances, and the habits that make us feel secure. The last quarter moon is always asking what needs adjustment. While a fixed T-square, meaning all the signs are in the fixed quality, can create those adjustments that no one particularly wants. Stability and stagnation aren't necessarily the same thing. We do have a little break from some of that tension as Venus enters Libra, one of her favorite places to be. The vibe immediately shifts to beauty, balance, romance, and relationships, and meaningful connections. Well, Venus barely gets a chance to get settled into the sign of Libra before becoming part of one of the smoother configurations in our opening forecast. An air trine. This air trine gives us some breathing room before the opening act closes with another shift in communication. August 9th, Mercury enters Leo. Conversations start getting a little bit louder. Mercury just entered Leo. This is less about, look at me, and more about, let me show you what matters to my heart. It's a beautiful transit for sharing your idea, creating content, public speaking, performing, or finally saying the thing that you've been rehearsing in your head a million times. So in the first couple weeks of August, we have Leo becoming increasingly active. We got a lot of trines and air energy causing communication and flow of thoughts and ideas. We have encountered multiple T-squares, seeing a contrast between friction and flow. August begins with harvest, gives us a couple pressure systems, and then briefly opens with some considerably easier air. But starting August 11th, the larger weather pattern begins to change. Mars enters Cancer, and only one day later, we have the Leo solar eclipse. Don't be surprised if motivation starts feeling less like chasing a goal and more like protecting what matters. Mars changes the emotional temperature. Plant intentions and begin writing a new chapter. A solar eclipse amplifies that symbolism. Think of it like a plot twist. The solar eclipse opens the portal or begins the season, however you look at it. We have several quiet days as Scorpio pressure builds, and then the first quarter moon asks for action, and Mars has barely entered Cancer before we arrive at the defining moment of this month. So make sure, notice what you're protecting and whether the situation actually requires armor. Now, let's get to the good stuff. And now, let's get into eclipse season. The idea is that eclipses tend to coincide with transitions, revelations, endings, and beginnings. So rather than viewing each eclipse as an isolated event, some practitioners think of the time between them as a chapter, where the story is still unfolding. Solar eclipses happen at a new moon where the sun and the moon align near the lunar nodes. Symbolically, this amplifies or disrupts the energy of that new moon or the new lunar cycle. Things can get obscured before they're revealed and can unfold over time, not just within that few week period. So not completely obvious on eclipse day. In Leo, this creates questions like, am I visible? What am I creating? What deserves my wholehearted investment? Where does pride help me stand tall, but also may prevent adjustments? It's not a prediction of catastrophe. Eclipse season doesn't equal automatic doom. It's more heightened, changeable astrological weather. It's not a cosmic threat notification. It's whether pay attention to the conditions. After the solar eclipse, we get several days without any major transits or aspects on the forecast. That doesn't mean nothing is happening. It gives us some room to breathe and watch what's developing. And thus, August 18th, that pressure starts to build again. Moon has entered Scorpio at this point and creates two squares between Pluto and Aquarius, and then Jupiter in Leo. Again, these are more fixed signs. Again, like earlier on August 4th, these are fixed signs creating these pressure points, which creates more themes of endurance, commitment, persistence, but also resistance to change. In this case, we have a Scorpio moon with emotional depth, elements of privacy, instinct, and intensity, and a desire to understand what's beneath the surface. Aquarius Pluto is based on transformation of structures and patterns, power dynamics, and collective systemic perspective. In the lovely sign of Leo creates expansion, in this case confidence, performance, and visibility. Jupiter can make anything bigger, including whatever tension already exists. And remember, we're now inside the eclipse portal. So I'm particularly interested. Themes may echo themes that began around the solar eclipse. Intensity tells you something matters, doesn't actually tell you who's right. And that Scorpio moon directly carries us into the next day, August 19th, which is our last quarter moon. Today's forecast. The first quarter moon is in Scorpio. First quarter moon is when the intentions we planted at the new moon meet their first real test. Scorpio, these challenges may feel deeply personal. Emotions can run beneath the surface. Hidden motivations, easier to notice. We're invited to look honestly at what we're holding on to or avoiding. Scorpio, the first obstacle isn't necessarily a stop sign. It may be information about the road. So by August 19th, we're 1 week into the eclipse portal, and the Leo eclipse cycle has reached its first quarter checkpoint. But the next few days give a change in conditions. The moon moves into Sagittarius. We get an opportunity period. So August 20th, our moon moves into Sagittarius and then will oppose Uranus in Gemini. This is a pretty long opportunity period, which I call favorable conditions, because it will continue until Saturday when the moon then goes into Capricorn. So Sagittarius and Gemini activate information, experience, perspective, curiosity, all those good aspects, perspective and curiosity axis. Uranus introduces disruption, surprise, novelty, sudden changes, or breakthroughs. So while plans may change unexpectedly, they can be in an expansive, positive manner. Sagittarius wants the larger meaning or story. Gemini wants information and possibilities. Uranus can interrupt one's assumptions, not necessarily in a negative sense. The interruptions may be the opportunity. Particularly useful in work or play, but as long as we are open to changes as we are still in that eclipse portal. Leave room in the plan for the plan to change. And then one of the most supportive configurations of the month, a fire trine. First, we have the moon in Sagittarius. The moon reflects our emotional landscape. Sagittarius wants to explore it. It asks questions, seeks meaning, and looks toward what's possible. Next is Jupiter in Leo.
Jupiter expands whatever it touches. In Leo, it encourages confidence, creativity, generosity, and the courage to let your authentic self be seen. Finally, Saturn in Aries. Saturn teaches through discipline and commitment. In Aries, it reminds us that courage isn't just a feeling, it's something built through consistent action. Notice where these planets are sitting. Aries.
So remember that air trine we saw earlier this month? Now we're looking at the same flowing geometry, but through an entirely different element. So we finally get some favorable conditions for starting a project, acting on an idea, leaning into creative work, taking that moment of leadership, putting structure around a vague idea, and finally putting some legs on that concept we've been circling. You don't need to know where the entire eclipse season is going to make that first step. And after all that fire, August 22nd changes the backdrop entirely. The sun leaves Leo and enters Virgo. Welcome to Virgo season. Today's forecast: the sun enters Virgo. As we move from Leo season into Virgo season, the energy shifts from expression to refinement. Leo asks, what wants to shine? Virgo asks, how can I make it better? Let's be real, Virgo is often reduced to labels like perfectionist or OCD, organized, but at its core, this is a sign of observation, discernment, and meaningful improvement. Pay attention to this Virgo shift, because Virgo becomes one side of the axis involved in our lunar eclipse at the end of the month. Keep an eye on that. August 23rd, we have Vulcania. Vulcan's fire isn't just the pretty, inspirational kind. This fire can create or consume. Historically, Vulcania was observed during the dry, hot end of the summer days, when fire was a real threat. Offerings were made to Vulcan in hopes that destructive fire would be kept at bay. Symbolically, the forge gives us another symbolic way to work with that imagery. Different system, same sky. And an interesting thematic echo after all that fire, wouldn't you say? Because astrologically, August 23rd isn't quite finished with us yet. We have a Capricorn moon T-squared.
First, we have the moon in Capricorn. The moon reflects our emotional landscape and intuition. Capricorn asks us to Cancer. Mars shows how we take action. In Cancer, that action is often protective, instinctive, and emotionally motivated. Opposition asks us to hold two perspectives at once. Now let's add Saturn and Neptune, who are traveling together up here in Aries. Saturn represents structure, commitment, reality. Neptune represents dreams, ideals, and imagination.
We have a prickly lunar T-squared involving Neptune, Mars, and Saturn, creating a potentially murky mix of delusion, aggression, resentment, and judgment. Try not to be too hard on yourself if things are not going well. Well, on August 25th, Virgo gets some reinforcements. We have another planet coming home as Mercury enters Virgo, with themes of communication, analysis, categorization, and discernment. Details become easier to see. Excellent time for editing, planning, troubleshooting, and systems thinking. And the editor has officially entered the chat. Mercury rules communications, thoughts, information, and how we process what's happening around us. And Virgo is one of Mercury's home signs. So while Mercury and Leo wanted to say it with its whole chest, Mercury in Virgo wants to know, okay, but is it accurate? This is mutable Earth. We're taking information and figuring out what's actually useful. What needs editing? What details did I miss? What system could work better? And what can we simplify? So we're not simply getting two unrelated ingresses. Virgo is accumulating emphasis. This matters because we're approaching the Pisces lunar eclipse. But first, before we head there, August 26th gives us a little bit of an opportunity period again. We have an Aquarius moon opposing Jupiter in Leo. This creates a positive opportunity period for favorable conditions for reaching out in social and community activities. Again, that same eclipse warning as for last Thursday. So don't forget, we've been inside the eclipse season since August 12th. The sun has now left Leo and has moved into Virgo, where Mercury shortly joined after. The astrological atmosphere has shifted from that Leo emphasis that opened the portal towards that Virgo, and opposite Virgo sits Pisces, which is exactly where our full moon eclipse occurs. And that's where our forecast is headed next. On August 28th, we reach the other side of the portal, a full moon lunar eclipse in Pisces. And the eclipse isn't arriving alone. Full moons represent culmination, closure, illumination, and release. Add an eclipse and the volume gets turned up. Virgo wants to analyze, to organize, to identify the problem, and figure out exactly what we're supposed to do about it. Pisces reminds us that some things aren't going to neatly fit into a spreadsheet. And after everything August has thrown into the forecast, we close the month on a considerably more cooperative note. Jupiter in Leo trines Saturn in Aries. Jupiter in Leo says, grow, expand, take the chance. Saturn says, okay, but what is the plan? And under a trine, those two energies do have a better time working together. So unlike the August 21st fire trine, this is not moon-driven passing weather. Jupiter and Saturn are slow-moving planets, so this aspect has a more broader influence than a single day. We're ending August with expansion and structure actually actively working together. Now, today, at the end of the month, we're looking at long-lasting effects. We're looking at long-lasting relationships between them. And if Jupiter and Saturn look familiar, they should. The Sagittarius moon moved quickly through, but the developing relationship between Jupiter and Saturn remain. So, although we had some rough weather and very dramatic bursts of pressure points, August 31st ends on creative, collaborative notes. Good conditions for long-term planning, committing to that creative goal, putting structure behind an idea, measured expansion, and realistically taking that next step. Balancing optimism with responsibility, which is what made things last. And that's where August leaves us. Not necessarily with every question answered, especially after 2 eclipses. That lesson is going to take months to integrate, but with an opportunity to take what we've observed and give it some structure. So we begin the month on harvest. We have pressure, flow, solar eclipse, the portal, fire, Virgo discern, lunar eclipse, and finally something to build with. As always, astrology is the weather report, not an instruction manual. Observe the conditions, make your own connections, and decide how you want to move through them.